My name is Eudora Thorne, but my friends call me Dora. For 40 years, I was the most feared zoning attorney in the state. I didn't care about wills or divorces. I cared about who owned the land and what the city allowed them to do with it. When you spend decades studying property lines, you learn that a house isn't just a home, it's a fortress. But even the strongest fortress can be taken if you let the enemy through the front door. That's exactly what my oldest friend Rose did. Rose is 80, wealthy, and far too trusting. 6 months ago, she met Tiffany Thorne, no relation, thank God, a holistic health coach at a wellness retreat. Tiffany was young, blonde, and radiated a fake Zen energy. She convinced Rose that she needed a live-in wellness overhaul. Within weeks, Tiffany had moved into Rose's $3 million waterfront mansion in Marblehead. At first, it was green smoothies and yoga, but then the locks were changed. Tiffany told me Rose was on a silent retreat and couldn't come to the phone. When I showed up at the front gate, Tiffany met me with a smug smile. She handed me a piece of paper, a lifetime irrevocable lease. It gave Tiffany the right to live in the mansion for the rest of her life, rent-free, in exchange for wellness services. Tiffany wasn't a coach. She was a professional squatter who targeted high-end estates. She knew that in this state, evicting a tenant with a signed lease can take 2 years in court. She had already started throwing loud, drug-fueled parties in Rose's ballroom, while Rose was confined to the servants' quarters in the back. Tiffany thought she was untouchable because she had legal standing as a resident. She didn't realize that while she was playing house, I was looking at the zoning maps. Tiffany was looking at the lease. I was looking at the foundation. If I couldn't kick her out of the house, I would simply make the house a place she begged to leave. I spent a week watching the house from my car. I saw high-end catering trucks arriving and young, sketchy influencers filming videos by Rose's infinity pool. Tiffany was turning the mansion into a content house, charging people to film there. Meanwhile, I caught a glimpse of Rose through a second-story window. She looked thin, pale, and terrified. Tiffany had cut off her internet and taken her car keys. I tried to call the police, but Tiffany was prepared. She showed them the lease and a wellness contract that Rose had signed, which stated that Rose had voluntarily entered a period of isolation for spiritual healing. The police told me their hands were tied. It was a civil matter. Tiffany laughed at me from the balcony. "Go home, Dora," she shouted. "The law says I belong here. You're just a bitter old woman who can't handle the new world." That was her second mistake. She assumed my law was the same as hers. She was thinking about tenant rights. I was thinking about municipal code. I went back to my home office and pulled the original 1920s blueprints for Rose's estate. I spent the night cross-referencing them with the city's new environmental protection overlays. I discovered that Rose's mansion sat on a very specific type of geological formation. Most importantly, the front yard, the only entrance to the property, was technically designated as a potential public utility easement. This meant the city had the right to fees that land at any time for critical infrastructure. I didn't need a judge to evict Tiffany. I needed the Department of Public Works. I began drafting a project proposal that would turn Rose's front lawn into a nightmare that Tiffany's yoga retreats couldn't survive. Tiffany's parties grew louder. She started a membership club, charging people $500 a night to stay at the mansion. She was making a fortune while Rose sat in the dark. I knew I had to move fast. I called an old contact at the city water and sewer department. I told him I had evidence of a massive underground lead pipe crisis directly beneath the entrance of the Thorne Rose estate. I didn't lie. I simply pointed out that the 100-year-old pipes were statistically likely to fail. Using my influence as a former city attorney, I convinced the city to fast-track an emergency infrastructure replacement project. But here was the beauty of it. I didn't want them to fix the pipes. I wanted them to dig. I met Tiffany at the gate the morning the construction crews arrived. She was in a rab robe, holding a kale juice. "What is this?" she screamed over the sound of a backhoe. "You can't do this. I have a lease." "The lease covers the house, Tiffany," I said, leaning against my car, "but the city owns the easement, and according to this work order, they'll be digging a 20-foot deep trench across your entire driveway for the next 6 months. No cars in, no cars out." Tiffany looked at the massive pit being dug. Her influencer friends were already packing their bags, terrified their luxury cars would be trapped. But Tiffany just smirked. She said, "I can walk to the street. I'm not leaving. I have enough supplies in there for a year. You can't starve me out, Dora." She was right. I couldn't starve her, but I hadn't even started the real wellness overhaul yet. The trench was just the perimeter of the cage. Now I was going to turn on the noise and vibration phase. The construction wasn't enough. Tiffany started using a drone to fly in supplies and groceries. She was determined to stay. She posted a video online calling herself a warrioress fighting against corporate bullying. She was gaining followers and Rose was still trapped inside. I knew I had to escalate the psychological pressure. I discovered that the city had a surplus of high-intensity ultrasonic pest repellers and industrial air scrubbers used for toxic dust mitigation during construction. I suggested to the foreman that because of the sensitive geological nature of the site, these machines needed to run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right next to the mansion's bedroom windows. The sound was a constant low-frequency hum that vibrated the glass in the windows. It was designed to be within legal decibel limits, so the police couldn't stop it, but it was psychologically devastating. You couldn't sleep, you couldn't think, you couldn't even have a conversation without feeling like your teeth were rattling. Tiffany tried to sue for a nuisance injunction, but I represented the construction company pro bono. I showed the judge that the machines were safety-mandated equipment for a public health emergency. The judge denied her request. This was twist 4. Tiffany was now living in a mansion with no driveway, surrounded by a 20-foot deep trench with a constant vibration that made her yoga impossible. But Tiffany was stubborn. She started wearing industrial earplugs and doubled down. She told me through the gate, "I'm staying until she dies, then the house is mine anyway." That's when I realized Tiffany had a secret endgame. She wasn't just a squatter. She had a forged transfer on death deed. She was waiting for Rose to fade away. I realized I couldn't just make her leave. I had to make her sign a confession. I needed to get inside the house to get Rose out, but Tiffany had reinforced the doors. I decided to use Tiffany's own holistic obsession against her. I had the construction crew start uncovering large amounts of dark, crumbly soil. I told the foreman to put up biohazard, asbestos, and lead signs all over the property. I called Tiffany on her cell phone. "Tiffany, dear," I said, "I have some terrible news. The digging has uncovered a massive historical dumping ground of industrial asbestos directly under the mansion. The air scrubbers are working, but the house is officially a level 4 biohazard zone." Tiffany scoffed. "You're lying. You're just trying to scare me." "Check the city's public health portal," I said. I had already filed the preliminary risk assessment. "The city is declaring the building unfit for human occupancy. If you stay in there, you are legally waiving all rights to health insurance claims. And more importantly, if Rose stays in there, you are liable for endangering a vulnerable adult." Tiffany looked out the window at the men in white hazmat suits, my private investigators in costume, walking around her yard. For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in her eyes. She was a health coach. Nothing scared her more than toxins. She started frantically packing her bags. "I'm leaving," she yelled through the window, "but I'm taking Rose with me. She's my client." "You can't," I said. "The medical transport is already here to take Rose to a clean facility. You, however, have to be decontaminated before you can enter the public street." I watched as she realized she was trapped in a poisoned mansion. She was finally ready to negotiate. But I wasn't going to give her an easy exit. I wanted the forged deed, the lease, and her signature on a permanent restraining order. Tiffany was panicking. She was convinced the air in the mansion was killing her. She stood at the front door wearing 3 face masks and plastic gloves. "Get me out of here," she screamed. "I'll leave. Just stop the construction and let me cross the trench." I stood on the other side of the pit. "I can't stop the city work, Tiffany, but I can offer you a private extraction. However, my security team can only move authorized personnel. As long as you have that lifetime lease, you are a resident, and residents are required by law to stay for the decontamination period of 30 days. "I don't want the lease," she shrieked. "It's a death trap. I'll sign whatever you want." I flew a drone across the trench. Inside was a voluntary rescission of lease and a confession of fraudulent inducement. In this document, she admitted that she had manipulated Rose into signing the lease while Rose was under the influence of herbal sedatives Tiffany had been giving her. This was twist 6. Tiffany was so desperate to escape the asbestos that she didn't realize she was signing a confession that would lead to a 10-year prison sentence for elder abuse and grand larceny. She signed every page, her hand shaking. She even included the location of the forged transfer on death deed hidden in the mansion's library. I flew the drone back. I looked at the documents. They were perfect. "Okay, Tiffany," I said, "the decontamination team will meet you at the back gate." I watched her run to the back of the house. There were no hazmat suits there, just 2 regular police officers waiting to put her in handcuffs. There was no asbestos. There was no biohazard. There was just a very large pile of dark mulch from the local garden center and a grandmother who knew how to play with the city's paperwork. The moment Tiffany was in the back of the police cruiser, the emergency construction stopped. The 24/7 vibration machines were turned off. The silence that fell over the Marblehead estate was deafening. I walked across the temporary bridge the crew had built and entered the mansion. I found Rose in the servants' quarters. She was sitting by a small window, clutching her knitting. When she saw me, she burst into tears. "Dora, is she gone? Is the poison gone?" "There was never any poison, Rose," I said, hugging her, "except for that woman." We spent the next hour walking through the house. It was a disaster. Tiffany had ruined the silk wallpaper with her vision boards and left rotting food in the kitchen. But the house was ours again. I called the district attorney and handed over the confession Tiffany had signed. Between the confession and the forged deed I found in the library, the case was open and shut. This was twist 7. I discovered that Tiffany had already started a quiet title action to take the house. If I had waited even 1 more week, the house would have legally changed names, and it would have been nearly impossible to get back. My asbestos scam hadn't just saved Rose, it had saved the property title by a matter of days. Tiffany was charged with identity theft, forgery, and false imprisonment. Because she had used the internet to market the house for her club, it became a federal wire fraud case. Her wellness empire was revealed to be a string of similar scams across 3 states. The worrieress was going to spend a long time in a place with very poor feng shui. The criminal case was handled, but I wanted to make sure Tiffany never had a dime to start a new scam. I filed a civil suit for damages on behalf of Rose. I sued for emotional distress, property destruction, and loss of quiet enjoyment. Because of the confession Tiffany signed to escape the toxic best, we didn't even need a trial. We used her own signed words against her. I tracked down the bank accounts where she'd been depositing the membership fees from her influencer club. There was over $400,000 sitting in a Chase account. I didn't just freeze the account. I used a writ of attachment to seize it. This was twist 8. I didn't give the money to Rose. Rose didn't need it. I used the money to create a Victims of Elder Fraud fund in Rose's name. We used Tiffany's own stolen profits to pay for the legal fees of other seniors who were fighting squatters. Tiffany's lawyers tried to argue that the asbestos trap was illegal, but I showed the court that as a private citizen, I had simply expressed a concern to the city, and the city had made its own decision to dig. I hadn't broken a single law. I had simply navigated the zoning and easement codes with expert precision. Tiffany was left with nothing, not even enough for a lawyer. She was assigned a public defender and ended up taking a plea deal for 12 years. 6 months later, the trench in the front yard was filled in. We didn't just put back the grass, we built a magnificent wall of protection. It was a stone fence with a state-of-the-art security system that only Rose and I had the codes for. Rose had recovered her health and her spirit. She was back to her gardening, but now she was a lot more selective about who she invited for tea. Clara came over to help Rose with the garden. It was a beautiful sight, the two women I had saved working together to build something new. We sat on the porch looking out at the ocean. "Dora," Rose said, "I still can't believe you convinced the city to dig a trench for 6 months just to scare a girl." "I didn't convince them, Rose," I said. "I showed them a problem they didn't know they had. That's what a good lawyer does. We don't create the law, we just make sure it points in the right direction." This was twist 9. I revealed to Rose that I had actually bought the easement from the city during the construction phase. I now technically owned the first 30 feet of her front yard. I gave her the deed as a birthday present. "Now," I told her, "no one can even get to your front door without my permission. You are officially the most protected woman in Marblehead." We laughed and toasted with real champagne, not green smoothies. I'm back in my office now. My retirement has been active. I keep a small, high-frequency pest repeller on my desk. Every time I turn it on and hear that low hum, I think of Tiffany Thorne sitting in her prison cell. I heard she tried to start a yoga class in the yard, but no one would join because she kept talking about asbestos ghosts. The world is full of people like Tiffany. They think that because they are young and tech-savvy, they can outrun the old guard. They think the law is a set of rules they can bend. They don't realize that for people like me, the law is a landscape. We know every hill, every valley, and every hidden pitfall. I received a letter from the city last week. They wanted to know if I had any more concerns about the local infrastructure. I told them things were quiet for now, but I keep my blueprints ready, I keep my zoning maps updated, and I always keep a few hazmat suits in the trunk of my car. The final twist? I checked the Marblehead property records yesterday. A new wellness guru just moved in 3 houses down from Rose. He's already started talking about lifetime memberships. I think it's time I go over and introduce myself. I'll bring some cookies and a copy of the city's latest noise ordinance manual, because in this neighborhood, the only thing that's holistic is the way I handle justice, completely, thoroughly, and with no survivors.